Thank you so much for joining me today, Adam. I really enjoyed your documentary, Fish and Men. My experience with the film was eye-opening. Real quickly, I'll just kind of give my experience. The exploration of the pressures of local fishing communities have that I knew nothing about really going into the documentary was eye-opening and very interesting and moving. What resonated most was the story's examination of like the many struggles, and it did paint a bleak reality of the demand-driven fishing and industry, and juxtapose that also with some inspiring glimpses into like prosperous fishery models around the world. I thought it was a great balance, really well done. I really enjoyed it. I thought Rich, the Gloucester fisherman, was there was many stories and many fishermen talked about and discussed with throughout the documentary, but his story was kind of the heartbeat for me, just my personal experience, and just throwing that out. And then also just wanted to say that I really enjoyed it, and I thought you and your team did an amazing job, and that's why I'm looking forward to hearing more about how the story came together. So with that, maybe you could introduce yourself and share what drew you into creating Fish and Men and kind of how that started.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for watching and the kind words. Yeah, my involvement with it really came out of my partner, Darby Duffin, who had previously worked on this theme, and he wasn't really at that phase of his life a filmmaker. But he had this idea about, kind of exposing the themes in this film and how it hasn't really been talked about it outside of kind of like the fishery circles and just how when he kind of described it to me, what, this conundrum of what we eat and not knowing where it comes from, and kind of like, well, what if we could make a film that sort of tells people where it comes from? And we just started shooting. I said, I can't believe nobody's made a movie about this. You Google, you get a good idea for a film and you're like, has this been done before? Like,
Right.
And it hadn't. And so introducing myself, I'm a filmmaker ever since I got out of college. I've been on film sets, started as a PA, worked my way up through the art department, became a production designer, and now I've been directing TV commercials for over 20 years. So I'm a filmmaker in a very short format version of it. But what I love about my work is that I get to go out and be a director, and sometimes make something really good. Sometimes it's just a solid execution that sells something. But
yeah.
I love, and given that at that point in my life, which was 2013, took us 6 years to get this thing out of the womb. And but in 2013, I was smack in the middle of my commercial career, and Darby came to me with this idea, and I was like, let's just do it. Because we were living in New England at the time.
Okay.
And so we went, well, let's just shoot down to Gloucester, America's oldest fishing port. And Darby had identified a couple of fishermen that were willing to talk. And so we're like, well, let's just start with the salty beating hearts of this issue.
Yeah.
And I think early on, Darby and I agreed that we were, you kind of think about like, what's the kind of doc you want to make, and what are the fundamentals that for example, one fundamental is, supersize me. Does the filmmaker become a character in the film? We were both like, not us. That's not us. Nothing against anything I'm saying. We're just, And then the other thing that we wanted to do is we did not want to make an advocacy film. We knew that we wanted, if there were any kind of controversial or conflicting worldviews going on between the characters in the film or the stakeholders we were representing to discuss themes, we wanted them to voice it in their voice, and we wanted to somehow cleverly, with editing, intercut all of the perspectives so that the viewer isn't being told what's right and wrong for the most part. So anyway, I think those are some of the fundamentals that Darby and I tried to hold on to as we started editing.
Mhm.
But yeah, it really just started with, Darby had the seed of the idea, and when we started shooting in Gloucester,
Mhm.
I don't know if you see in the film, there's an interview with Rich there where he says, I mean, we kind of save it for Act 3 where he
Right.
almost tears up. He says, "There's nothing left. I have
Mhm.
$400,000 worth of debt on, that are loans that are left paying for
Mhm.
a now extinct system that doesn't even work anymore, and he still
Mhm.
holds that debt." So
Right.
that was like our first day of shooting. We got that interview, and we were like, oh, "Wow, there's a lot to unpack here. We have no idea." And I think that's another thing about sometimes making docs is you can find like a theme that you're really into, and then you start digging and you just start talking to people, because that's how we approach it, is like, let's just start interviewing people, because we don't know what the story is yet. Like you can do the research through your subjects. And let's face it, this film is chock full of information.
Mhm.
And that's another thing that I don't think we really realized, that we were making such an information dense film. um,
Mhm.
and I think that again was like a real learning experience for Darby and I once we got into the finer parts of the edit, is what are the themes that are our story, and what are the themes, such as, notice we don't really talk too much about, say, radioactive fish in Fukushima, which,
Mm.
which was a thing at the time. It
Interesting.
probably still is, but like there are certain themes that we don't talk about, recreational fishing at all. In fact, we had to make a choice geographically pretty much to use Cape Cod. I'm doing this. This is Cape Cod right here,
Mhm. Yeah.
which, funny side note, I'm born and raised in New England, New Hampshire,
Oh, interesting.
and I grew up my entire life going to Cape Cod. And it wasn't until I was something years old during this movie that I realized that Cape Cod was named after a fish, and it's named after the fish. Did you know that? Did you ever think it
No,
was
that went
named
over
after
my
cod?
head. That went over my head
So did
too until
I.
this moment. Yeah.
Till this moment, I had the
Yeah.
same, and I'm
Yeah.
like, Mike, I mean, if you notice, like what we did is we picked a species. We're like, who's this?
Mm.
Who's this stuff? Who's the protagonist fish species of our movie?
Mhm.
It's Atlantic cod, 100%
Okay.
the fish that, like, basically you could say founded America, and we kind of
Mhm.
posit that in the movie. It's like
Mhm.
people came here in search of food, arguably. So
Mhm.
anyway, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I think it dawned on me when we were shooting in the state legislature in the Capitol in Boston, the Massachusetts state Capitol, where there is a wooden cod hung over the whole proscenium. And I was like, oh my gosh, Cape Cod. I get it.
That is so interesting. That is so interesting. So many things you just said right there that really drew up some thoughts that I had too. And that scene that you pointed out specifically is interesting, that was like one of the earlier scenes with Rich where he's tearing up, because that it is deeper into the documentary and I was invested, but that was where I started getting teary-eyed a little bit. I'm like, I can relate to this guy so much too, just because he brought it to it's like working in a factory, or it's no different than that. It's like, this is all I've ever known. And that's why I said at the top too, like, I think he was maybe the heartbeat. For me, he's like my main character of it.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. Also, you speak to kind of documentaries in general, the nature of it. Is there like a trepidation? There's got to be, maybe that's part of the job, or was there like a fear that, how are we going to how do we wrap this up? How does this story, because there is so much information. So there's the element of getting all the information across, but also making it feel like a story so it will resonate with people.
Yeah.
And then when you're doing the interviews, you got to have maybe like, is there a trepidation and a fear that, is there a story worthy telling here? Or so maybe going into it blind is a part of making a documentary, or going into these conversations with that trepidation. Was that a big factor for you?
Yeah.
Going.
I don't know. I think in hindsight,
Yeah.
especially as a fearless director, I want to not use the word fear whenever
Mm.
possible. But if I was going to go back to that word, because that word's like a big word for me, fear. But and I will say that the fear is that you're never going to finish the film. That to me was genuine fear. There were moments where we had run out of money. It had been 4 years already. You know, the family, my personal bank account, like Darby's personal bank account, everything we invested so much to this point. And I remember we're about 2 years out from, so 2017, we were 4 years deep into it. And when I say 4 years deep, we're working on this on and off while we both have lives. It's not like 4 straight years of work. However, the more you invest, the more important it becomes. And then the closer it becomes to a finished thing, the more you can't wait to finish it. And so, yeah, the fear was never finishing, not knowing where the money was going to come from, not knowing how we were going to clear over 300 special effects stock or archival shots that needed to be licensed correctly. Like all of that stuff was so overwhelming because it was just me and Darby. So I think there was fear, it was that. But getting back to your question about just how much information, like how do we form this into something where we can convey enough but not too much information to make this thing feel like a college lecture or something. And to also keep some kind of emotional thread in there, which you're exactly right. I mean, we would always kind of lean into the fishermen that we started with for that. But as you see, there are some people who also are pretty passionate about kind of the conservation angle of that. So I think what we had to do, again, going back to what you decide not to talk about in film, is also a huge part of it. But you almost can't know that until you've explored cutting scenes and going, God, this still feels like we said it all the time. Like, is this weeds? Are we getting in the weeds again? We probably should have said seaweeds.
Nice one.
You can't imagine how many fishing jokes and metaphors and similes there are in the world that you wind up using. But so I think that was absolutely the hardest part of the edit. And I mean, it took us, well, this is a little bit sausage factory, but we had a moment where we thought we had a cut that was presentable for the Tribeca Film Festival, whose deadline is in December. And so to do it, we decided to schedule our first screening with filmmakers. And I did it with my buddy in LA, who's got some real heavy hitter doc filmmaker buddies. And they all came to his house and we had a screening. And it was just such a reality check that me and Darby kind of thought the film was ready to present. And we just proceeded to get eviscerated that night by all these people that had done way more doc stuff than we had. And we were just, I think that was a fear moment. That night I'll never forget. And from that point on, that was 2017, we proceeded to find a new editor and cut for 2 years straight. She was almost full-time, Heidi Zimmerman, who became a co-writer and a co-producer. And she kind of was the savior of things when it came to finding somebody that could take everything we had and really start flushing out scenes that didn't have too much seaweeds. And so I think it wasn't until that scary night where we got eviscerated by fellow filmmakers that we truly, it was almost like, like you take martial arts for 4 years and you become a black belt. And then when you become a black belt, you realize, well, now I'm just beginning. Now I'm in first grade to truly master that. And I think that was when we were like, okay, now we actually see how much work we have to do, and it's overwhelming, but we've come too far. And so I think from there, we had to really put the work in to try and figure out, how to get it under 90 minutes, how to organize it in a way that had some serious stuff, then some levity, some facts and some emotion, some characters and some statistics, and like all these things, and not be like too much of any of them.
What a journey. I mean, I do think you stuck the landing of finding that balance. It's so interesting to hear some of those ups and downs on your creative process and the process of getting it done in terms of the logistics and that process. Speaking of the balance, like I did mention like it does really show the problems and the the bleak landscape of the fishing industry. But there were, for me, some of the most powerful parts was when you shift to some of the great examples like Norway or the Dock to Dish. And how does the structure come together when it comes to balancing the hope and the doom of the topic?
Doom is a strong word, and I think that was another one of our North Stars, is that we did not want to be a doom and gloom film. And there are plenty that are out there, especially when it comes to environmental films. Like you'll notice in there, we don't get too deep in the weeds of global warming. Even that, is probably half and half the people in the world. And so it's kind of like, all right, well, we're just going to stick to the facts that the seawater in this area has warmed up this much. And, what used to be the temperature in, it's dropped 3 degrees, and this is, then talk to experts to let them tell us how that affects marine life. And the biomass that the sea contains in that area. And so I think getting into the science part of it is also really interesting, the way that swerves into the way that regulations are established. And so the regulations are what the fishermen live and die by. And so we have NOAA as kind of this, and we use John Bullard as kind of this guy who willingly steps into this impossible position to he's the former mayor of New Bedford, Massachusetts. So that is one of that in fact, New Bedford right now, and for the last few decades, is the most if box office, like an amount of fish in America, it had a dollar amount, New Bedford generates the most of any fishing port in America. And mostly because of the scallop fishery there. But the fisheries change too, because things. So I just think when we saw all this stuff kind of intertwined, I'm wandering a little bit now, but one of the big questions we also were asking ourselves is, if this film has a villain, who is it? Because we didn't want to make John Bullard and NOAA be really villains. Like, sure, the fishermen had their problems, and we show in some of those meetings how they're like, but their survival's on the line.
Right. It's very interesting. I think that's super insightful what you're saying. And apologies for making it like black and white with the hope and doom. I think in that aspect, it was simply the fact that the cod or the fish was just gone, and there was many reasons why it was depleting, and there was many domino effects that it was having on the fishermen communities and the fisheries. And I think that was like what made this solid for me, because there's so many, like you're saying, like you have to pick what you're leaving out. You're not even talking about people fishing on their own. It's more industrial fishing. But
as we defined it, the American small boat commercial fishermen.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, as opposed to like the factory boats.
Gotcha. Okay, and then that's what's kind of dwindling. So that was like the tension that drew me in, and then I guess leading into another question, it really talks about consumer demand driving that, and that was one of the shifts into, okay, this is where it's kind of crescendoing into these positive examples, or these successful, like prosperous examples like Dock to Dish, and how it was inspired by Spain. What do you think are the barriers preventing similar community supported models? Or maybe there aren't, or maybe that's happening a lot. Did you see more of those kind of Dock to Dish? What I liked about it was there were creative solutions that were like flipping it on its head and supply driven instead of demand driven. What was your take on that? And
the whole time, and this again is first time doc filmmakers, and I laugh because I've been shooting films commercials for 20 years, and I'm still a first time filmmaker on this film. You know what I mean? It was such a learning experience, and early on, and I feel like a lot of young filmmakers, first time filmmakers, my daughter's in film school right now, she's writing a thesis, and the tendency for filmmakers, when you're asking, tell me a log line of your film, or what's your synopsis of your film, and the whole thing winds up being, I am going to describe to you our goals of what the viewer will take from our film. That's not a synopsis. That's not a way to describe what your film's about. You're like doing pie in the sky of what you want your audience to feel. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. We have so the idea that, but we were very much always thinking about the consumer, the people who are eating the fish and driving demand, and specifically Americans, and what we eat as Americans. So when I describe this film, someone says, "Hey, I made Fisherman," what it's about, I go, "Well, it's about the American seafood industry and the American seafood diet." That's usually my quickest one sentence, where I'm giving, at least in that, like half the importance to how Americans consume the fish. And so I think what we tried to do is we tried to say, okay, if, as filmmakers, we're still wondering what's the takeaway. And if the viewer could take away one rule to live by, we're hoping that maybe that resonates what it could be. And what we were hoping it would be, I don't know what you thought, was that if you eat American seafood that's been regulated by the American fishery, by NOAA, you're eating some of the most sustainable seafood in the world. Like, if you just start with eating stuff that's been regulated in this country, we're one of the most, if not the most heavily regulated fisheries in the world. So, like we mentioned, for example, in our film, that sea bass, which is probably one of the tastiest things anyone has on their menu. When you see it on a menu, it's always delicious, but it's 85% illegally harvested internationally. So it's like, you kind of shouldn't ever order sea bass unless you know exactly where it's coming from. And I think that just goes back to our big takeaway, is like, that's the dock to dish creed. Know your fisherman.
Know your fisherman.
So now I'll tell you, to be honest, it's a little idealistic. You know what I mean? Like, I think we struggled as filmmakers with the whole, like, okay, well, yeah, to go to your local farmer's market and buy from the people with the coolers there, which is what kind of we're saying you should do. You're probably going to pay $3 or more a pound more for that. So it's a little bit pay to play. But on the other hand, like, we got to start somewhere getting the word out about this. And that also goes to this word we bring up in the film. And I'm not sure, be curious to see if you took away anything from this, but it's called traceability. And traceability represents, like, basically communicating to the consumer where the fish came from on the labeling of it. And so there are certain grocery chains that do that really well. And then there, are some that don't even think about it. So, yeah, it's the idea of how we could change people's behavior is like, that's the silver bullet. Like, that's what we're after. And so I think if people just like might watch this, and it's like, people ask me after this, they're like, well, so are you like that guy that always is asking where's this piece of fish come from when you like get a fillet of fish at McDonald's or something? And it's like, no, maybe not at McDonald's, or maybe not even, but like at a nice restaurant, you know what I mean? At a place that's like all about their food, just maybe for fun, ask once in a while. The times that I have done it, I mean, since we made the movie, I do this once in a while, and usually the server will say, I'm not sure, let me go check with the chef, and they'll come back and they'll give you some kind of answer.
I mean, that did actually stick with me, because I'll be honest, like, I'm not some of the regulations and the laws, I kind of forgot what they were. Just being honest with you, at the end of the documentary, I'm like, okay, I can go back and look. Like, I know one had Magnus in it, in the name. I was like, I can go back and look, but that did stick. The term you said, traceability, stuck with me, and because it was a simple lesson that I could take away. And one of the things somebody in the documentary said during talking about traceability was, if they can't get you an answer, maybe that is just reason enough to kind of choose a different option, where if they should kind of maybe it is a time, maybe that is a start, kind of push. It's a gentle push. All you're doing is asking kind of where everybody is entitled to know where their food comes from and to know where their fish comes from. So like if you can't find it easily, then that's should be an incentive for companies and fisheries to make it easy and super transparent for you.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, totally stuck with me. I think the traceability. Another thing that stuck with me was just idealistic, yes. But again, you know, you do have to start somewhere. Like eat local, I think is another, you know, just kind of more general lesson that you can take from it. And I thought it was awesome, the examples where you showed the chefs where they, you know, they got their supply for the day, and then they were using it, almost like sparked in these examples like some creativity for the chefs beyond what they might do with their skill set and their art form. Which it is an art form, and what they're using with what they get that day, it kind of sparks new creativity and new amazing things. So I thought that was one of the best things about the film. I know we're a little bit over time, but I wanted to maybe do you have anything next up or anything you're working on?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. What about where can people find the film? I watched it on Amazon. It was perfectly easy to find on there, under $4. I grabbed it and I have it. I really enjoyed it. Is there any other places that you kind of want?
It's on most of the platforms. Apple TV, it's on Vudu. It's on all of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great.
It's out there. Yeah.
Great. I wanted to also shout out that it's showing to my audience. I'm in San Diego, so it's showing at the Coronado Film Festival this week. So I'll be there, and I'm excited to watch it with a community of people.
You're gonna see it again. I'm gonna be
there.
I'm
gonna see it again. Hopefully I'll see you there. So just thanks again for taking the time to talk about this film. Thanks for making the film. It was an incredible journey, and from my perspective, I just thank you for it. And you stuck the landing, and it was amazing final product. So yeah, we could probably just end it here. And thanks again. I appreciate your time. And everybody go out and see Fish and Men. Hopefully you can see it in Coronado with us.
November 7th, Thursday at noon at the Spreckles Center